Some franchises get stronger with each film. Some franchises fall flat after 2 exceptionally well-crafted films. Other franchises turn into one of the biggest names in the world. And some franchises should have only been one singular story. Spielberg ruled the 80s and late 90s, creating many iconic films to fill his staggering resume. Indiana Jones, E.T., and the topic of this video, Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park was my childhood. I watched it every day till my VCR decided to not work. Like most kids who probably watched this film grew a fond to dinosaurs. Personally, because of this movie, I began reading on these fascinating yet terrifying creatures who probably would have ripped me in half in seconds. The maddening reality of playing around with something out of the ordinary, unaware of how long things might turn for the worse. In simpler terms, the repercussions of doing something without questioning.
I call the rape of the natural world.
The film was based on the famous novel by Michael Crichton, Jurassic Park, with few changes made from the book to screen. More on that later. Film takes the best aspects of Spielberg and his skills as an elegant filmmaker, creating what I like to call a Spielberg classic, and made a dinosaur adventure thriller that is viewed as one of his best. I mean, come on, it's Spielberg. 99% of his filmography is pretty much all hits, and while the other 1%... Enough of my story and boasting about Spielberg being the greatest filmmaker, time to delve into the story.
Hey, what'd that touch?
The film begins with a very haunting score and the sound of branches and trees crashing to one another, with a team of InGen workers and their guide Robert Mulden looking beyond at the horizon, waiting for the horror that is about to strike. The film doesn't exhibit clearly what's inside this box, but the snarls, growls, and screeches and the point of view of vicious beasts that wasn't naturally created. Spielberg shed the thriller and horror element of this film very well, right from the opening scene, not knowing the complete subject inside the box, but very few glimpses of the physical force inside. And John freaking Williams plays around with the score where it has a suspense tone to it until the raptor dashes forward, causing one of the InGen workers to fall in front of death. He gets pulled by the raptor in the cargo while the InGen workers try to tase the raptor. Spielberg simply doesn't show the raptor in full form. He plays around giving brief glances at the sadistic eyes. Robert holding the InGen worker, yelling to the workers to shoot her repeatedly. But in an unfortunate event, the worker wasn't able to escape the clutches of the predator, as in a very cold shot, his hand fades from the grasp of Robert and the echoes of gunshots. Gennaro heads to the mining of Mano de Dios to visit Hammond, who has ditched early from the dig site, something about the $20 million lawsuit for the meal the raptor just had. And the investors are really worried about the safety of the park, cause who wouldn't be? They plan on bringing Ian Malcolm and Alan Grant on the adventure to test the park's safety before opening it to the public.
What do they got in there, King Kong?
At the dig site in Montana, paleontologist Alan Grant and paleobotanist Ellie Sattler and their team are digging up a velociraptor fossil. Alan, who's fond of these animals, begins to explain to his team the relatability dinosaurs have to birds, more than reptiles.
The vertebrae, full of air sacs and hollows, just like a bird.
Until a kid makes a very snarky comment on how the description of the animals doesn't sound very scary. Sure, buddy. Alan, who hates kids and finds them messy and annoying, pokes fun, sparking some sense into the fella, taking a mock-up claw, sending a haunting image of how a raptor strikes their prey till their organs spill.
Here, or here.
But will not slash you and claw you to your last breath. They will eat you alive.
So, try to show a little respect.
After giving the kid nightmares for the rest of his life, Ellie and Alan receive a visitor from a billionaire named John Hammond and puts an offer on the table for them to take a look at his new park. In return, he will fund their dig sites, which is a no-brainer offer they happily accept.
What kind of park is this? It's right up your alley.
The lovely tourists head to Isla Nublar. Ian Malcolm, Alan, Ellie, and Gennaro, and John Hammond begin small talk, introducing themselves, and this is what Spielberg does best. It's his way of conveying an actual conversation. It feels natural, doesn't feel like actors are reading off of a script, but feels like a fucking conversation. Some are a bit skeptical, others worried about a lawsuit. The jolly good old crew are waiting for the disaster that is about to arrive to around the park. Get a little breeze of hungry, ferocious animals. Very safe dinosaurs. Alan witnessing one in flesh, pointing and mesmerizing such a figure in front of his eyes.
It's a dinosaur.
I'll show you.
John Hammond insists that he shows a presentation how these dinosaurs were created using the blood from the mosquitoes stuck in sap and filling the gaps in the strands with the frog DNA.
The complete DNA of a frog to fill in the holes.
The presentation continues in their laboratory where they're cooking up the dinosaurs. They receive an explanation how the dinosaurs were, how they're all female to avoid any reproduction if they ever escaped into the wild. Ian Malcolm, who's the I told you so guy, argues eventually they'll spread their wings and evolve to the point they will be able to start breeding because of evolution.
Life, finds a way.
And boy was he right. I love the look of distress in Grant's face, studying these very animals in horror yet amazement, knowing he just tortured a kid by telling his guts will spill when he meets a velociraptor to know how he's holding that very animal in his hands. Wild stuff.
You bred raptors.
Alan, curious on viewing the raptor's pen, witnesses feeding time. A cow was sacrificed in the absolute worst way possible, getting ripped into shreds, so well there's literally nothing left of the poor animal. Not even fucking bones. Spielberg plays around with the audience, not showing the raptors in full picture again. Just a glimpse of the curiosity from the characters and the distaste.
They should all be destroyed.
Robert meets with the tourists discussing these ferocious animals, being designed at cheetah speed and being extremely intelligent, very intelligent, that there were once 8 raptors, but the raptor called the big one killed 5 of the raptors in order to keep the other 2 in check, which will pay off later in the film. At the lunch table, each person shares their perspective on the park. Hammond, who's surprisingly not a greedy asshole, refuted Gennaro's plan at opening to the more wealthy. He's simply a visionary wanting to express his dream to the world. No such thing as coupons in his eyes, just affordability. In Malcolm, the I told you so guy argues scientists never questioned the negative results of breeding dinosaurs.
And now you're selling it. You're gonna sell it.
In an irrelevant time period. Hammond is obviously being stubborn by these claims and refutes Ian Malcolm's intelligence. But Alan and Ellie also see the logic behind Ian's worries for the park. Hammond's grandkids arrive as he like to see the park's perspective from children. As for Alan, well, it'll be a rough ride for him. Since, he despises kids. Lex is the nerd of the two, meanwhile Tim is the huge fan of dinosaurs and bugs Alan Grant on every little fact. The tour begins and many dinosaurs are no-shows.
Damn.
What's worse for Hammond is there is a catastrophic storm headed their way, which will force them to halt the tour. The chatty and Malcolm is flirting with Ellie in front of Grant, telling the theory of chaos, while Grant looks beyond the horizon and leaps out of the car to check it out. Many others follow him, and they see a triceratops, a sick one for that fact. Alan is mesmerized by such an animal as it was his favorite growing up. I don't know what it is with Spielberg, but it makes every scene look very special, even if it's as simple as Grant lying on a triceratops' stomach when she's sick. Oh yeah, about that storm, it's on its way. Gennaro, fearing for his life, requests everyone to head back to the cars. Hammond is extremely frustrated with the situation as nothing is going for him. The rain is pouring hard on the island, and Edgy panicking about not being able to get off the island with the dino embryos. He's a sloppy mess. He's lazy and drinks a lot of pop, but he's only here because he's skilled at debugging and setting up security systems through code. That is his only asset. Nedry, running out of time, shuts down the security systems in order to access the embryos and security gates. He takes the Jeep, heads to the dock in a rush of rain. Meanwhile, the tour halts the cars due to the power being taken out. And conveniently in front of the T-Rex pen. Back at the lab, Arnold is trying to get through the security system and booting the power back on. But Nedry has completely hacked the system to avoid such a thing.
Phones are out too.
He's cut the power for every pen except for the Raptors. The calm before the storm. The vehicles are stuck in auto mode till the power comes back on. Tim is playing around with the Jurassic Park merchandise, night vision goggles. Tim zooms into the T-Rex enclosure and notices the goat's chain is swinging without the goat being latched on. In a very jump scare scene, the leg from the goat lands on the roof of the car. Everyone is in fear and the T-Rex rises from the clump of trees and bushes and stares menacingly at the vehicles. After testing the power of the fences, which are currently inactive, Gennaro runs from the cars and finds the best hiding spot, the toilet. The Rex begins to rip out the wires of the fence and makes its way between the two cars. Just want to point out it's a thriller scene with many elements you'd find in a horror film. The lack of music uplifts the intensity as the audience are seeing the scene at its very raw form. allowing for the scene to breathe with no distracting factors at the forefront. Lex is panicking, pulls out a flashlight, shining the light towards the dinosaur. Due to the Rex's vision being based on movement, he follows the light. But the fact that Gennaro never closed the door, Tim rushes to the front and closes it, alerting the carnivore, who examines the car and the kids inside. What's neat about this scene is this was mostly done practical. They actually sculpted the Rex, so this is real as it can fucking get. Just like a kid in his first time in the sandbox, T-Rex plays around with the car and smashes his whole face into the glass roof, pushing down to try to eat Lex and Tim. Alan, eaten at the disbelief at the havoc that the big animal is causing, Alan, knowing their vision is based on movement, uses a flare to distract the T-Rex and use it to beat away from the car. And Ian Malcolm also lights a flare, drawing the T-Rex towards him, but sadly he couldn't outrun the fellow carnivore and gets tossed into the bathroom. And this is where the greatest death in the history of cinema comes in. Alan gets Lex out but didn't have the time to get Tim, as toilet man wasn't enough for Mrs. Rex, as she is still hungry. Well, so much for that first day of the tour. As for Nedry, he got viciously eaten by the Dilophosaurus. Everything is a complete disaster. Kids and Alan are finding their way back to the visitor center. Meanwhile, back at the laboratory, the group are working to get the power back on. Now more problems have arose as the raptors learn how to escape from their pen and ventured into the jungle, and two of them trick Robert.
Clever girl.
As the big one pounces on him, ripping him apart from the head. Alan drops the kids off at the visitor center while he tries to look for help. But there are more problems. The kitchen sequence is easily at the top as best scenes in the entirety of the franchise. But Lex outsmarts the big one and Tim traps one of them in the freezer to become frozen raptor meat. The big one, eyeing the two leaving the kitchen, makes her way to the control room where Lex and Tim met up with Ellie and Alan. As Lex reboots the power, the raptor cleverly breaks through the glass door and follows her prey into the main entrance, where the third raptor corners the group. And the big one sandwiches the group in the middle until... So T-Rex is apparently a ninja, made zero noise and kills the two, made large ass footsteps causing a ripple, but he was also apparently trained in the League of Shadows. Alan would not endorse the park, Hammond's dream is crushed, and Isla Nublar is now the home to all dinosaurs. Some stories should stay as one story, not cheap knockoffs repeating the same message over and over, because there isn't anything new to play around with in the sandbox. John made the problem, face consequences, and lesson learned. Possibly people will learn after 2 disappointing sequels that this franchise should only be one story, and even if they did, it possibly could not make close to $2 billion. Wait, it's the Force Awakens effect. Not a single Jurassic film since this piece of shit. People simply in a nostalgic feel. The sequels possibly cannot make $1 billion or even more.
The rules of this city are very unclear.
Jurassic Park took a concept which could have easily failed, probably been a nice ride for children, but nowhere near in terms of film quality. A top-notch, well-made film for that matter. Then I realized Spielberg from the 90s made it. I mean, he made animals into horror characters to each of their own, because we never saw these things properly in our current world. So there was endless possibilities of trying to make a belief in these dinosaurs. Spielberg took that horror and thriller route, in the perspective of us. I mean, these dinosaurs, that's their average predator who's looking for a meal of the day. But to us, they're the Michael Myers of the park. And that's the direction Spielberg went, and he made it work. The characters aren't bad, each of them go through their own arc, whether it's small or a long progression throughout the film. No curveballs, no uneven steps. Like Alan, the dino nerd, learns to adapt with children around him. He grows fatherly bond with him and Lex. Just at the start, he was demonstrating to a kid how raptors kill their prey in an attempt to scare him. Now he's trying to protect them throughout the film just like a father would. John Hammond was a visionist. He had a dream and wanted to share it to the world. But his dream was the impossible, not in terms of creating this very dream, but a dream that lasts. He's very persistent in the film. He dodges excellent points with ignorant comments, not realizing the dangers of his dream until his own family were in danger, and some of the tourists were eaten alive, and Ian's theory comes to life. At the end, we saw a man lose everything in one night. So yeah, I decided to go read the book which the film takes inspiration from. So that's why this video was taking a while to make. Now, the book was written by Michael Crichton, who also worked with Spielberg doing the screenplay for this film. Now, since it's a novel, the events are extremely brutal and very descriptive for certain scenes which take place like Nedry. Let me read a passage from the novel. The dinosaur had spit in his eyes. Even as he realized it, the pain overwhelmed him and he dropped to his knees, disoriented, wheezing. He collapsed onto his side, his cheek pressed to the wet ground, his breath coming in thin whistles, through the constant, ever-screaming pain that caused flashing spots of light to appear beyond his tightly shut eyelids. And despite the pain, he forced his eyes open, and still he saw nothing but flashing spots against the black. Slowly the realization came to him. He was blind. The hooting was louder as Nedry scrambled to his feet and staggered back against the side panel of the car. As a wave of nausea and dizziness swept over him, the dinosaur was close now. He could feel it coming close. He's dimly aware of its snorting breath. He couldn't see anything and his terror was extreme. He stretched out his hands and waving them wildly in the air to ward off the attack he knew was coming. And then there was a new searing pain like a fiery knife in his belly, and Nedry stumbled, reaching blindly down to touch the ragged edge of his shirt, and then a thick slippery mass that was surprisingly warm, and with the horror he suddenly knew he was holding his own intestines in his hands. The dinosaur had tore him open. His guts had fallen out. Nedry fell to the ground and landed on something scaly and cold. It was the animal's foot, and then there was a new pain on both sides of his head. The pain grew worse and he was lifted to his feet. He knew the dinosaur had his head in its jaws, and the horror of that realization was followed by a final wish that it will all be ended soon. Like I said, very descriptive. Spielberg certainly changed several characters and their fates. Hammond dies by getting eaten by Compys, Malcolm dies from his injuries in the book, and Milden doesn't get mauled by a raptor. Those are not even the only changes. Spielberg altered characters like Grant. Grant in the book was fine and all, but it's neat that we got to see Grant develop as a character when he goes on the adventure with the children. From not liking children to having no problem with them, it's nice that Spielberg gave some sort of development to Grant's character near the end. And I love that scene where all three of them are sleeping on the tree and Grant looks at that claw and he just throws it. It's a nice symbolism of his progression. He was using that very claw to scare that little kid, but now he doesn't see that use for that claw. That claw is like him throwing away that hatred. It's a nice symbolism from Spielberg and I definitely find that very neat. Hammond in the book was a corrupt billionaire, didn't even really care about the tourists. Hell, he didn't even care about his own grandchildren, but simply wanted the park to be approved. It's an overused trope of a corrupt billionaire who's bad, which thankfully Spielberg altered to simply a visionist and a man who wants the world to see this creative zoo like none other. The madness of a vision was left on the island with no room to continue. Now, without saying, Spielberg did stay true a bit to the book. I mean, not everything is going to be exact same, as it would 100% screw with the pacing, and I'm sure Universal weren't probably looking for intestines and organs being ripped out given the fact that it's a PG-13 film. There isn't much differences between the book and the film besides the ending, but I love that the book goes deeper into the conspiracies of the park and paints a more darker vision of Jurassic Park, which is see why they toned it down a bit, but still eyeing that horror side of a misstep from a billionaire. But nothing in this film took me out. Each character successfully plays their role, which helps the story progress without oversaturating themselves to the point of annoyance like some sequels have done. Spielberg definitely knows how to write kids in his films. He focuses more on the realistic aspect of what might some personalities be in certain situations without being cheesy and annoying. Lex was a great character despite doing decisions which, as an observant, might feel pretty dumb. The film highlights this as Tim points out to turn the light off. She's simply doing the best she can despite being a kid to protect her brother from a ferocious T-Rex by luring her away. Later in the film, when conversing with Grant, we learn how protective she is. And near the dining, she outsmarts the raptors by distracting them with the spoon, allowing Tim to escape. She's useful as well when booting the systems. She's not just there to be the annoying kid. She actually does stuff. She actually progresses the movie. She actually does something useful in the film. Tim pokes fun at her for being a computer nerd, but proves otherwise when she tries to boot up the security systems. Jurassic Park is a great example of a Spielberg classic, because it's all his strengths we've seen from his previous films, the magic from E.T., the horror from Jaws, the adventure feel from Indiana Jones, all in one. Jurassic Park. That's all I got to say about this absolute gem, so yeah, goodbye.